on the political situation in Pakistan, calling for an urgent investigation. Today, we intend to address a critical issue of immense significance, the plight of civil liberties in the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, a concern that has been brought into sharp focus by the diligent efforts of a UK-based group, Citizens Against State Torture or CAT. This group comprises of a coalition of medics, lawyers, and human rights activists who are deeply troubled by the erosion of civil society and rights in Pakistan. Leading the organization as director is Dr. Usman Amir Khan, who you will hear from shortly. Dr. Khan is not only a founder of CAT, but also intricately connected PTI emerged as the largest political party in the National Assembly, catapulting Mr. Khan to the premiership. However, this ascent was abruptly halted in 2022 when a no-confidence vote stripped him of his position, propelling Pakistan into a whirlwind of political turmoil. Since this pivotal event, we have witnessed an unprecedented crackdown on civil and political rights, the detention of Mr. Khan in Adiala jail, and allegations of him facing over 180 criminal charges are not merely legal battles, they represent an alarming suppression of political expression. The arrest and detention of thousands of PTI supporters, the charges against them in military courts under military law, the arrest of PTI members and senior leaders, and the bans on media reporting on Mr. Khan by the Pakistani Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, or PEMRA, are symptomatic of a chilling effect on the very freedoms that form the cornerstone of a democratic society. Imran Khan's speeches and even mention of his name in a broadcast is now unlawful in Pakistan. The essence of democracy lies in the freedom of expression and association, the right to speak, to assemble, to challenge, and to engage in the political process. The treatment of Mr. Khan and his associates raises serious questions about the state of these freedoms in Pakistan. With the country on the cusp of another general election scheduled for this Thursday, February the 8th, the current climate of suppression casts a long shadow over the prospect of free and fair elections. This is not merely a domestic concern, but a fundamental human rights issue that calls for immediate international attention and action. CAT's petition to the Special Rapporteur is a request for an urgent investigation into the suppression of political expression in Pakistan. They seek to ensure the free flow of ideas, which is an indispensable requirement for the promotion of democratic spaces and the full realization of the right to access information, both crucial elements in the promotion of free and fair democratic elections. The mandate of the Special Rapporteur on promotion and protection of freedom of opinion and expression is clear, yet the scope of violations detailed in the petition go beyond this mandate, necessitating additional scrutiny by the United Nations Human Rights Committee the alleged sale of state gifts that indicative of politically motivated campaign to discredit and disable a significant political figure and his party. Internationally respected organizations such as Amnesty International and the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan have decried the use of excessive force against peaceful protesters and the suppression of political expression. The actions of the Pakistani authorities not only contravene the nation's constitution, but also violate international human rights standards. I'd now like to introduce you to the first of our speakers. Dr. Usman Khan is co-founder and director of Citizens Against Torture. Dr. Khan is a consultant surgeon. He's closely associated to the political situation in Pakistan, being Imran Khan's cousin. Dr. Khan.
Thank you, Tayyab. Good morning and assalamu alaikum, everyone. Firstly, I would like to thank Bindsman for all their hard work in organizing this press. And thank you to all of you for making the effort for coming over here and all those who have joined us online. I'm a medical doctor and director of Citizens Against
मुझे लगता है कि आप लोगों को आवाज नहीं आ रही है। इस वक्त बाइंड्समैन लॉ की जो है वो कॉन्फ्रेंस हो रही है। सिटीजंस अगेंस्ट स्टेट टॉर्चर, डॉक्टर उस्मान खान, इमरान खान के जो कजन है वो ये प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस कर रहे हैं। टिकटॉक के ऊपर तो ऑडियो बड़ी क्लियर आ रही है, लेकिन मुझे पता चल रहा है कि आ रही है। आप लोग कह रहे हैं, कामरान भी कह रहे हैं, कोई लोग कह रहे हैं नहीं आ रही, तो आपका अपना कोई प्रॉब्लम है। मेरे ख्याल में अपनी डिवाइस आप चेक कर लें। बाइंड्समैन लॉ की तरफ से प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस है। डॉक्टर उस्मान खान, इमरान खान के कजन इस वक्त जो है वो बात कर रहे हैं इस वक्त, और ये लंदन के अंदर प्रेस कॉन्फ्रेंस हो रही है। इसमें उन्होंने बताया है कि सीरीज ऑफ लिटिगेशन जो है वो कर रहे हैं यूनाइटेड नेशन में, इंटरनेशनल कोर्ट ऑफ जस्टिस के अंदर। पाकिस्तान में विजिट भी करने जा रहे हैं। पाकिस्तान में जो फौज की फस्तायत है उसके ऊपर ये बातचीत इन्होंने की है, उसके ऊपर ये डिटेल बातचीत कर रहे हैं। और मेरी तो आपको आवाज आ रही होगी, मुझे लगता है कि आपको शायद डॉक्टर उस्मान खान की आवाज नहीं आ रही।
And staff of Pakistan Tehreek Insaf are being illegally detained, tortured, and killed. The very many cases of human rights violations include the cases of Pakistani journalists Arshad Sharif and Imran Riaz Khan. Arshad, who fled from Pakistan following threats to his life, was tragically killed in Kenya in strange circumstances. According to international media reports, many suspect that the threats to kill him were actually carried out. Famous journalist Imran Riaz Khan was abducted and incarcerated in May 2023 for reporting on and being critical of atrocities being committed by Pakistani establishment. He was released after 4 months in detention. Khan had lost 22 kilogram weight during his disappearance and was struggling to speak coherently. We have seen the mass human rights abuses. There is complete restriction on freedom of protest, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly. According to Professor Jeffrey D. Sachs, professor and director of Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, USA, we all know, I'm now taking you to the background of all this. We all know that principal instrument of US foreign policy is covert regime change, meaning a secret action by the US government to bring down the government of another country. Covert regime change by the US is shockingly routine. One authoritative study by Boston University professor Lindsay O'Rourke counts 64 such actions during the Cold War. And in fact, the number was far larger because she chose to count repeated attempts within one country as a single extended episode. All of this brings us to Pakistan, another case where evidence points strongly to US-led regime change. In this case, the US desired to bring down the government of Prime Minister Imran Khan, the charismatic, talented, and hugely popular leader in Pakistan, renowned both for his world-leading cricket mastery and for his common touch with the people. His popularity, independence, and enormous talents make him a prime target of the US, which frets about popular leaders who don't fall into line with US policy. Imran Khan's sin was to be cooperative with Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping by also seeking normal relations with the United States. The great mantra of US foreign policy and activating principle of the CIA is that a foreign leader is either with us or against us. There are strong reasons to believe that US actions led to the removal from power of Prime Minister Imran Khan in April 2022. There was a meeting held in the US State Department on March 7, 2022, between Assistant Secretary of State for the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs, Donald Lu, and Pakistan Ambassador to United States, Asad Majid Khan. Following the meeting, Ambassador Khan sent a secret cable known as Cipher back to Islamabad, which was then leaked to the famous American magazine Intercept by a Pakistani military official. The cable recounts how Assistant Secretary Lu berated Prime Minister Khan for his neutral stance on Ukraine. The cable quotes Lu as saying that people here and in Europe are quite concerned about why Pakistan is taking such an aggressive neutral position on Ukraine. If such a position is even possible, it does not seem such a neutral stand to us. Lu then conveyed the bottom line to the Ambassador Khan. I think if the no confidence vote against the Prime Minister succeeds, all will be forgiven in Washington because the Russia visit is being looked at as a decision by Prime Minister only. Otherwise, I think it will be tough going ahead. 5 weeks later, on April 10, 2022, with the US blunt threat hanging over the powerful Pakistani military and with the military's hold over the Pakistani parliament, the parliament ousted Khan in a no-confidence vote. Within weeks, the new government followed with brazenly manufactured charges of corruption against Khan to put him under arrest and prevent his return to power. In a utterly Orwellian turn, when Khan made known the existence of the diplomatic cable that revealed America's role in his ouster, the new government and the army charged Khan with espionage. He has now been convicted on these charges to an unconscionable 10 years, with the US government remaining silent on this outrage. Pakistan is now going to hold elections on February 8 with its most popular democratic leader in prison, and with Khan's party the subject of relentless attacks, political murders, media blackouts, and other heavy-handed repression. In all of this, the US government is utterly complicit. So much for America's democratic values. The US government has gotten its way for now and has deeply destabilized the nuclear-armed nation of 240 million people. Only Imran Khan's release from prison and his participation in the upcoming elections could restore stability. Caste demands that Mr. Khan must be released from prison. All nearly 200 fake cases against him must be dropped. Over 10,000 of his party workers, which include men, women, and even minors, be released from prison. His party election symbol must be restored, and the Constitution of Pakistan must be fully restored. All these corrupt politicians, judges, bureaucrats, and army personnel must be brought to justice. The United States of America must reverse what it started. Otherwise, the situation in Pakistan will get out of hand, and it will be too late for an atomic country once it goes rogue. We ask the United Nations and citizens of the world to help us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Khan. I'm sure there'll be some questions for you at the end. So my next speaker is Rosa Polashek. Rosa is a barrister at Dowd Street Chambers. She is a lawyer qualified in the UK and New Zealand. Rosa specializes in public and administrative law and actions against authorities and is one of the lawyers advising CAST. Rosa.
Thank you. And I think thanks first of all to Tired and to CAST, both for instructing me, but also for CAST for having the presence of mind to push forward the cause for human rights in Pakistan and to draw international attention to what's happening there. It's clear that there are a number of interrelated human rights abuses happening in Pakistan, but of course the world's attention is in a number of places at this time, and it's important that we we have NGOs like CAST ensuring that attention is maintained on Pakistan as well. I want to acknowledge at the outset Mr. Khan's family, of course, particularly Dr. Khan, but other family members who are here as well, and the toll that this process has taken on them. I know that every time that I've spoken with Dr. Khan, there have been more and more stories about what's happened to him and other members of his family because of their support for Imran Khan and the severe repercussions that that's had for both them in the United Kingdom, but also those who remain in Pakistan. And it's important that we acknowledge those people today. I also want to acknowledge at the outset the current developments in Imran Khan's case. As Ty mentioned, we filed this petition yesterday, but of course it's been a moving feast to file this petition and face the ever-changing landscape of charges against Imran Khan, and also because of the recent convictions. In particular, in the last 3 days, 14 years sentence on corruption charges, a 10-year sentence for leaking state secrets, and finally a 7-year sentence alongside his wife for having a non-Islamic marriage, meaning for not waiting 20 days in order to remarry after his wife's divorce. At least one of these trials, we know, was held inside the jail where Mr. Khan was detained, and with serious restrictions on public access and on public reporting. Allegations have been made that Mr. Khan's lawyers were not able to cross-examine witnesses or even to call their own defence witnesses. Obviously, these raise, at the very least, serious questions about whether Mr. Khan's right to a fair trial have been upheld, and that's, of course, something that CAST will continue to look into. We also have to note that it appears far from coincidental that the timing of these convictions is occurring, as Tyab and Dr. Khan have mentioned, just a few days before the upcoming elections. These are all serious issues which need to be examined and which deserve close media scrutiny both internationally and within Pakistan. But unfortunately, what has become very evident from CAST's work, as culminated in the complaint filed with the UN Special Rapporteur, is that the media environment in Pakistan is increasingly restricted, and there is simply limited scope for any of the type of free reporting and investigation that's required of these centrally important incidents. I should say as well at the outset that, of course, Dr. Khan mentioned Mr. Khan's political views and his talent as a cricketer. And while I might be able to share in the admiration of his talent as a cricketer, I'm here specifically to talk about the legal perspective and the complaints that we've filed. And that's the perspective which I'll be able to bring today. So I want to start by emphasising what ought to be obvious, which Tyab has already spoken about, which is the very specific relationship between freedom of expression and democracy. And that's not simply a relationship that exists as a matter of common sense or politics. It's a relationship which exists as a matter of international law. Freedom of expression is protected under Article 19 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which Pakistan is a party to, and it includes both the freedom to seek information, but also the information to receive the freedom to receive information and to impart information. International law describes that freedom as the foundation stone for every free and democratic society. It's only when Article 19 is protected and the related rights to freedom of assembly, freedom of association, that the right to engage in politics can also be recognised. And that too is a right under international law. Article 25 specifically imbues the right for citizens to have the right and opportunity to take part in the conduct of public affairs directly or through freely chosen representatives, to vote and to be elected at genuine periodic elections, and to have access to the public services in his or her country. And it's entirely clear that those rights cannot be meaningfully exercised if there is not also those rights to freedom of expression being protected. In effect, international law recognises a right to political dissent and a right to political criticism because of the importance to individuals being able to express themselves, but also because in doing so they contribute to that wider human right, the collective right to have free and fair elections. And Article 19 is very prescriptive about the limits which can legitimately be placed on the right to free expression. They must be provided by law, they must be necessary and proportionate, and they must be applied only for the specific purposes for which they're allowed, which they're legally allowed. The UN Human Rights Committee has been explicit that although the right to free expression is not absolute, the ability to put limits on the right may never be invoked as a justification for the muzzling of the advocacy of multi-party democracy, democratic tenets, and human rights. And yet that is exactly what we see in Pakistan, as I'll come to. I also want to note that it's not only a duty to allow people to speak. States have a positive duty to create an enabling environment for the free communication of information and ideas. That means ensuring there's an environment where journalists are protected and are able to report freely. That might require the state to take positive action to protect those journalists. For example, again, something which, as we heard from Dr. Khan, and I'll come to, we're not seeing in the current media landscape in Pakistan. Of course, despite those guarantees and what might be thought to be a widening opportunity to access information, given the ability to access for citizen journalism, for access to the internet, NGOs like Freedom House are reporting deteriorating media freedom around the world. And what we see in Pakistan does appear to be part of a pattern of powerful regimes restricting their citizens' access to free information. And the evidence in Pakistan is very clear that there is restricted media freedom with a particular intended effect of preventing democratic engagement, and that this is being led by the authorities, including the military, to restrict that free reporting. I want to highlight three particular strands of evidence and types of restrictions that we've identified as taking place in Pakistan today, just 2 days before the general election. The first category are the restrictions on the free speech and expression of Imran Khan himself. The second are the restrictions on the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf political party, or PTI, as I'm going to call it from now on. And the third is what I consider a particularly dangerous and increasing use of internet shutdowns to prevent all type of media engagement by the citizens on the ground in Pakistan. These are necessarily interrelated, and all of these modes of political repression have been used together, but they indicate three distinct types of political repression which are taking place, or all of which are arguable breaches of international law. As to the restrictions on the speech of Imran Khan in particular, these are some of the most egregious breaches that we've been able to identify. Obviously, you've already heard some of the background to the political ousting and targeting of Mr. Khan. Alongside that, we've identified that he's been the subject of formal bans on his speech and on the recording of his speech by the government agency, the Pakistan Electronic Media Regulatory Authority, or KEMRA. Those bans have been imposed for different durations and for different content, but these have been implemented on the 4th of June 2022, 21st of August 2022, the 5th of November 2022, and the 5th of March 2023. And I stress that those are the ones that we've been able to find publicly available records of. And of course, there may be others. Each of these bans was purportedly justified on the basis that Mr. Khan's speeches amounted to hate speech or other incitements to violence. But the specific examples of when those bans came into force are telling as to the truth of those justifications. By way of example, on the 21st of August 2022, Mr. Khan gave a public speech streamed live on YouTube in which he implied that a PTI member would bring a civil claim for damages against the police for unlawful arrest, something which is obviously a necessary means to hold the state to account to ascertain when there has been such an unlawful arrest. This alone was enough to prompt a ban on the live broadcast of Mr. Khan's political speeches, with KEMRA issuing a release describing these as, quote, baseless allegations and spreading hate speech against state institutions and officers. The ban was later lifted by the High Court, but only subject to a requirement that Mr. Khan's speeches would only be broadcast on a delay, effectively to allow the state to monitor and check the content of Mr. Khan's speeches before the public were able to hear them. It should go without saying that this type of review and censorship by the government is not consistent with the right to free expression under Article 19. Again, on the 5th of November 2022, Mr. Khan gave a press conference and was accused of making allegations that the army and specific military leaders had been linked to his removal from office and later attempts to assassinate him. On the same day, Kemra announced a ban on media stations broadcasting or rebroadcasting any of his press conferences, and they described Mr. Khan's comments as, again I quote, hateful, slanderous, vilifying and unwarranted statements against the country's leadership and state institutions. The language here, in CAST's view, betrays the real reason for the regulation of Mr. Khan's speech. He had made statements against leading institutions. The government again later ordered this ban to be lifted, but this doesn't take away from the implications of the ban in the first place, the effect that that has on media companies, but also the clear implication that the government is in fact able to direct what decisions Kemra takes and doesn't take. Again, a particularly concerning feature for press freedom, since it indicates a lack of proper independence for a body which is purporting to act as a regulator of press freedom. As I mentioned, the Kemra bans not only have implications for Mr. Khan, but they have implications for the news channels who have broadcast his speeches. One news channel which breached the ban on the 5th of March had its broadcasting license immediately suspended. This type of retaliatory action indicates that Kemra is also wielding and government authorities in general in Pakistan are wielding their influence to control the political speech and control the Pakistani citizens' access to Imran Khan's political speech through more subtle means than just formal bans. For example, again, on the 31st of May 2023, Kemra sent out what was described as a directive to Pakistani news channels. It referred to protests and violence which had broken out on 9th of May and purported to remind media channels that they should refrain from providing airtime to any individuals who propagated hate speech. Again, the language is telling. Kemra described the events of the 9th of May, protests which had taken place in response to Imran Khan's arrest, as anti-state activities orchestrated by the politically charged up zealots of a political party behaving as hate mongers. In CAST's submission, this is not the language of an independent media regulator. This reporting indicates that this was taken exactly as it was intended by Kemra, as a message to news organisations not to report on Imran Khan or to allow his speech to be broadcast. In fact, the censorship of Imran Khan went beyond merely not broadcasting his speeches. Again, reporting indicates that senior military and intelligence officers had held meetings with owners of TV stations who were then advised not to run any news which even referred to Imran Khan by name. Examples included his name being beeped out if it was inadvertently referred to on air, and particularly perversely, one example of a news channel showing a clip featuring Mr. Khan in which his entire face and body were blurred out so that he could not be seen on television, and another senior news anchor being required to apologise for having slipped up and said his name on television. Again, I mentioned earlier that this is a legal perspective and not a political perspective, but it is worth noting that the bans on referring to Imran Khan also extend to airing any criticism of Imran Khan. Journalists who have in the past been critical and been voices for an independent press in Pakistan have indicated that these restrictions on even referring to Imran Khan have stopped them from even airing critical perspectives on him. These forms of pressure from the authorities and the military have continued right up to the doorstep of this election. There have been complaints made by the Pakistani Federal Union of Journalists and other unions calling on the judiciary and the caretaker Prime Minister to intervene against these growing challenges of censorship and the pressure on the media, unfortunately, to no response. Similarly, I've referred to the fact that there have been interventions by courts, and CAST have identified that Mr. Khan has been able to obtain some limited redress through the state courts, in particular on the 4th of January this year, when the Lahore High Court heard proceedings challenging some of those PIMRA bans. Again, it's particularly perverse in light of the information which we have from journalists about the bans which have taken place, that PIMRA in court denied that any bans on airing Imran Khan's speech had taken place at all. Notwithstanding those denials, the Lahore High Court directed PIMRA ensure that all candidates of political parties, including Imran Khan, were given free and unrestricted access to the media ahead of the general election. But in CAST's submission, these measures are fundamentally inadequate when the pressure exerted by PIMRA, the military, and intelligence operatives are not solely taking place through formal legal orders. It's clear from the facts I've already outlined that these messages from the very top are being passed out through a variety of mechanisms, not all of which can be controlled by the courts. There's therefore a particularly important role for the international legal sphere and for the international political accountability to uphold the rights, these Article 19 rights, which are so important. In fact, in some ways, the courts have played a role in facilitating the restrictions on media access for Imran Khan. In particular, as I've mentioned, his recent cipher trial was heard in private, foreign media were banned from attending, domestic media were later banned from attending, and Mr. Khan's family were only allowed to attend the trial on the basis that they were not allowed to disclose the proceedings on any platform. Again, these efforts restrict the media environment for Mr. Khan's political speech, but obviously also the political speech and choices of his family. Fundamentally, Mr. Khan has of course been entirely blocked from standing for election, and that in and of itself is a measure to restrict free democratic choice. But these efforts to police and limit his free speech are also serious breaches of his rights under international law. The second basket of facts that I wanted to talk about were the restrictions on the expressions of support for the PTI party. And of course, it's fair to note that many PTI supporters feel restricted in what they can say because of direct targeting of PTI supporters, as Dr. Khan has alluded to. The fact that there have been thousands of arrests of protesters supportive of Mr. Khan, the fact that many of those protesters were charged under vague and broad laws, including under military law, and of course, the fact that a number of high-profile PTI members have resigned due to apparent political pressure. This in and of itself has led to a widespread perception that the environment in Pakistan is such that citizens cannot express support for the PTI in public. And of course, I've mentioned that the state has a specific duty to ensure that the environment is one in which people can speak freely about all political parties. Instead, there is an environment of repression in which people are forced to self-censor. PTI supporters have anonymously given reports to other media about the chilling effect that this has had on their ability to express particularly social media support for Mr. Khan and for the PTI party. And some specific examples include senior party leaders of the PTI being targeted and arrested for social media posts that they've made, with subsequent allegations of torture and custody, the PTI's social media head being arrested and detained for 8 days, and the military using what were described by Freedom House as intimidation tactics to force several PTI social media workers to publicly denounce criticisms of the military which they had expressed online. There's also been similar efforts to restrict mention of Imran Khan's name on television, including channel-wide bans on referring to the PTI in any respect, and journalists identified as either being linked to the PTI or even supportive of the PTI being targeted and harassed. Of course, Dr. Khan has also mentioned today the fact that the PTI party has also recently had its electoral symbol stripped from it, meaning the symbol that appears next to its name on voting papers. As a result, in 2 days' time when the elections are held, all members of the PTI who stand in those elections will effectively have to be viewed as independents because they won't have that shared cricket bat symbol. In a country of around 58% illiteracy, that's a particularly large blow to the PTI. And it is an example of a restriction on freedom of association and assembly under Article 21 and 22 of the ICCPR. There is a right to associate with members of a political party and to be identified as such. And again, we've alluded to the fact that we will need to make a series of complaints in order to cover the gravity of what is happening in Pakistan in detail. The final category of event I wanted to talk about was internet shutdowns. And it's important to contextualize here that shutting down the internet has become a hallmark of repressive regimes around the world. Shutting down the internet stops the flow of ideas. It can stop news spreading about particular incidents, protests, state responses, but it also prevents citizens from coming together and organising and collaborating. All of those affect the rights to free expression, again, under Article 19, 21, and 22. And the UN Human Rights Committee and UN Special Rapporteurs have been entirely clear that the rights to free expression extend in exactly the same way online as they do in traditional media reporting, and that there is also a duty on the state to provide and facilitate internet access for their citizens. When we discuss internet shutdowns, these can involve complete blocks on internet access. They can involve blocks on particular social media, but also bandwidth throttling or deliberately reducing internet speeds, all of which have the same impact of preventing people being able to gather together online. The only advantage for this from an international perspective is that these internet shutdowns can be objectively monitored. Websites such as NetBlock are able to specifically track when internet blocking has been used, for when and for what duration. And it's through this means that we are able to say definitively that internet shutdowns have been taking place in Pakistan and have been taking place in particular around notable events for the PTI party or in response to crackdowns on the PTI party. In particular, initial reports of internet shutdowns began to emerge in August and September 2022 after Mr. Khan was removed from office and during a period of time where there were many protests in his favour on the streets. Specific examples include in November 2022, an online news site being blocked entirely by the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority, apparently on the orders of the Prime Minister and Minister of Information and Broadcasting, after it published an investigative report critical of the head of the army. Again, it goes without saying this is not consistent with Article 19. A major and well-documented internet shutdown took place after the protests which broke out on the 9th of May 2023, after a particularly concerning incident in which Mr. Khan was arrested from within a courtroom in the Islamabad High Court, and in which video showed intelligence officers coming through a window in order to drag him forcibly to the car. The video of this incident was circulated online and caused widespread distress, which escalated into serious unrest. And the government responded by exercising strict control over communications and media, including restricting mobile and broadband internet for 4 days, blocking Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. There were also arrests of at least 2 journalists within the media, and this was the subject at the time of widespread condemnation by human rights groups. But it bears reminding that there was very limited comment from international governments, and that this pattern of behaviour has continued by the Pakistani government. It's also important to note that there's been a lot of dispute over what happened in those events around the 9th of May and the extent to which the violence could be attributed to one group or another. One of the tragic effects of shutting down the internet is that it's very difficult for independent observers to identify specifically what happened because live information was not able to be broadcast at the time. And this is, of course, one of the reasons why free expression is so important. It's because it is one way which you can vindicate your other rights. If we come to this recent election campaigning period, there have been again sporadic prohibitions on internet access, including reported blocks on the 17th of December and the 8th of January last year and the 8th of January this year. And it's notable, of course, that these were both days in which the PTI had announced it was about to hold rallies online. And in fact, the 8th of January was the intended day for the PTI's manifesto launch. Ministers for the government have recently stated they are unable to guarantee that there will be unrestricted access to the internet on election day, purportedly for security concerns. But this, of course, raises valid and worrying concerns as to whether this will have a suppressing effect on voter turnout and what message it signals to people who may be in dissent from the government. These methods obviously also have a direct impact on the ability of PTI to convey its ideas and for there to be a proper democratic contest of ideas. I've been clear that in CAST's view, all of these measures are breaches of Article 19. They all involve restrictions on free speech, and particularly blatant ones in respect of the censoring of Imran Khan. And it's also CAST's view that these cannot meet the standard of being justified restrictions under international law in the sense of being either legal, necessary, or proportionate. At its most dramatic in the information which we've outlined, implied bans through threats through the military appearing in station network headquarters are obviously extra legal and simply cannot be justified within the law. To the extent that there have been attempts to justify them within the law, the language used in the camera orders belies the reality of whether these fall within the justified and limited set of reasons why free speech can be restricted. And in CAST's view, it's clear they cannot. So what steps have we taken on behalf of CAST? As Tyab has mentioned, the very first step which we've taken is to file a petition with the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of freedom of opinion and expression, Ms. Irene Khan. And Ms. Khan, there's a lot of Khans, is an independent human rights expert who investigates issues pertaining to freedom of opinion and expression. She's independent of the United Nations itself, and she's also obviously independent of all of the countries which are involved. And she's able to issue communications and raise concerns with the government of Pakistan directly. Indeed, it's relevant in that context to note that in the past year, Ms. Khan has issued 7 communications to the government of Pakistan, alongside her colleagues, the Special Rapporteur on the freedom of peaceful assembly and of association, freedom of religion, and the protection of human rights defenders, all raising concerns about media freedom in Pakistan. And those 7 communications in the last year is a sharp increase on 2022, which saw just 2 similar complaints. It's clear that there's an escalation taking place in Pakistan of oppression. And what's also clear from that is that there is a need for ongoing international attention to these issues and for international actors to apply pressure on the Pakistani government to engage with these independent human rights monitors. There's a need to show the Pakistani government that the international community is watching. Obviously, because of the upcoming election in 2 days, CAST's primary focus has been on the serious issue of media freedom and how this interplays with the democratic choice of those within Pakistan. But the facts we've outlined today demonstrate clear breaches of other human rights as well, and those will need to be followed up in due course. Finally, it's important to note that the restriction on rights that we've identified and outlined are not just about Imran Khan's personal right to express himself or the PTI's right as a collective to express themselves. It's not party political in that sense. These are rights which are also rights held by the citizens of Pakistan themselves to hear information from competing sources, to make decisions for themselves. That is the right to have information, to seek information, and to hear it freely, and therefore to be able to make democratic choices for themselves. It's in that context in particular that we invite the UN Special Rapporteur to review our petition urgently and to ensure, as I've said, that the Pakistani government's actions do not go without scrutiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa. We'll just get open the floor to some questions, but before we do that, Dr. Khan, I just wondered if you could just help us to just to let us know when the last time you spoke to Imran Khan was.
That was before Mr. Khan's arrest on 5th of August last year. Yes.
And have you been keeping in touch with the family?
Yes, I ring them almost twice a day. My brother, my sister-in-law, who's Imran Khan's sister also, and Shersha, who's here, his elder brother goes and meet Mr. Khan's regularly. And according to him, he is keeping very well. He exercises. He looks 15 years younger because he says during his premiership, he was so busy he didn't have time to exercise. Now he's exercising. He has read Quran 3 times with translation. Family has ran out of the books to provide him to read because he's such a big reader. And faith, he's not a leader as far as I'm concerned. Leaders come and go. He's the hero. Hero stays. Heroes live forever. That's what he has become.
And with regards to immediate family members, I understand that they've entered into some personal difficulties by visiting him.
Yes. Imran Khan's sister Alima Khan, who visits him every day, 5 days a week, and she's the kind of a spokesperson when she comes out of the prison. Journalists ask her questions like how Mr. Khan is doing and things like that. She's completely non-political. It's just that she's fighting for her brother. But now she has also received notices from Federal Investigation Agency saying that she's inciting terror and she's turning people against the army and things like that. So we have received 2 notices in 3 days to appear before the Federal Investigation Agencies, because she's also, they're labeling her as a terrorist. Of course, when you send somebody a notice from anti-terrorist law agency, so what does that mean?
Thank you. There's just a couple of questions on the platform and questions from the room. But just to deal with the questions on the platform, I think the International Court of Justice is very much in people's minds because of the Palestine-South Africa case. And there's a couple of questions that say, will we approach the ICJ or each other international platforms? Well, of course, as individuals, you can't approach the ICJ. To approach the ICJ, you have to be a state. So the answer to the question is no, we won't be doing that. Any questions from the floor? Yeah, sure.
Firstly, I wanted to about the media landscape in general in Pakistan. So, of course, you've outlined several issues around breaches of freedom of expression and freedom of the press in the last 2 years. I just wanted to hear more about how that compares to the media landscape in Pakistan in general. In recent years, compared before 2022, maybe it can't be described as the purest form of democracy or the freest press. So I just wanted to get a sense of to what extent has media repression escalated in the past 2 years, and what did it look like beforehand, in terms of the freedom to dissent and the freedom to kind of have debates and invite opposition figures.
Yeah, sure.
Shall I speak to that first?
Yeah.
Perhaps. So I think it's right to say that there's always been a level. Obviously, the military have always been a strong actor within Pakistan, and there's always been allegations to some degree of aspects of censorship taking place and the targeting of journalists. And if you look at the international, again, I referred to the fact that the UN Special Rapporteur had made previous complaints to Pakistan prior to 2022 as well. So there were some hallmarks there of a landscape where there was an aspect of media repression taking place. It is, however, it does seem to us to be notable that there has been a dramatic increase in some of the attempts, some of the more dramatic attempts at media censorship that have taken place, particularly the use of internet shutdowns is a very modern form of censorship, and the kind of repeated use of that is a particularly concerning.
ये बैरिस्टर रोजा पुलिस चेक हैं जो बोल रही हैं अगर आपके कोई सवालात हैं इस पैनल से तो मैं सवालात आपके उन तक पहुंचा सकता हूं, but you have to speak, draft your question in English and please put it in the comment section.
There has been an escalation in the attempts at censorship that have taken place, but obviously in the backdrop of a country where there had already been some of those attempts in the past and some of the facility for the government to take advantage of, for example, the lack of independence of camera.
Yes, I think there has always been some kind of a hold on media, but not, yes, of the governments also, but also of the army. But it was different in Imran Khan's regime. There was a journalist, very famous case when he was kidnapped and Mr. Khan came to know within 24 hours. He made sure that he was released by the special forces. But now it's completely different. It's actually a martial law at the moment. In fact, it's worse than martial law because you have a civilian non-elected government face in front of you, but their strings are being pulled by the army. So it's worse than an actually declared martial law. So, and they are being heavily bribed. One of the TV channels who always stood with Mr. Khan was blocked. Their license was taken away for 4 months. 4 months, a very big TV channel, till they finally succumbed to pressure. And now they are also pro-government.
I think it's also important to say that PEMRA is not a new invention. It's been around for a while. And I think the key issue here is the military's ability to utilize state institutions and political institutions in order to protect its own interests and further its own interests. So that's been an issue for a significant period of time. And as Dr. Khan and Imran Khan have both alleged, that the United States appeared to have been behind this change of government in Pakistan. And whilst I don't have evidence of that other than the evidence that Dr. Khan outlined, it's very clear that the things that we're discussing today are not things that have taken issue in Western governments. Western governments haven't been aware of them, most of them, to try to protect them. And that's an indication that it's working in their interest too. Any other questions? Sure.
You mean within Pakistan? Yeah. So what I was referring to there was specifically, although Imran Khan has been and the PTI party have been able to go to the courts and try to challenge camera orders, and they've had some success in doing so, in the sense that the courts have ordered that they should, in principle, be able to access, be able to promote their ideas freely. It appears that in reality, those court orders are not being respected, because when you have senior military officials and when you have allegations of senior military and intelligence officials turning up in in newsrooms, headquarters, and exercising their influence that way, rather than just operating within the sphere of the law. It's clear that that is something that they are not complying with the court's orders, that they are not interested in the rulings of the court, and that to that extent. So those things are concerning features to me, which suggest that even where a court is willing to go out on a limb and rule in Imran Khan or the PTI's favour, that is not in fact effective in securing their rights. And so it's to that extent my view is that the international legal community also needs to make clear that in its view, what is happening in terms of the censorship is a breach of international law, and that the state of Pakistan should be held to account for that breach.
There's a question on the platforms. Considering that the USA and UK favour engaging with the Pakistani army and covertly back its political meddling over the past decades, will your endeavours yield any impact? I think what I'd like to say about that is really straightforward. We've seen over the last few months significant shift in the geopolitics and the ability for non-traditional power states such as the West, United Kingdom, United States, and European states to have an impact on protecting and furthering the rule of law. We saw that in the ICJ with South Africa. And I think what's really important, and the reason why the work that CAST is doing is really important, is we're bringing the issue out from the darkness and into the public domain. And so people are able to actually understand what's happening in Pakistan. And why that's important is because I think we've entered into a global movement where people are starting to understand that the rule of law and principles of justice are really important, and that they themselves individually have to work to protect it. And whilst Pakistan may have an army and may have an establishment which suppresses political rights there, you can see the effect of that movement in Western countries on its own governments, moving the narrative towards protecting international law. So I think it's important just for that reason that we start to protect, as individuals, as organizations, as NGOs, we start to protect the rule of law. Okay. Is there any other questions?
You mentioned the serious allegations about US involvement in the removal of Imran Khan. I just wondered, I didn't see any reference to that in this petition. Are there any plans to ask the UN rapporteur to comment or to look into this aspect? And are you pursuing the US government on that front? And secondly, you outlined quite extensively the ways in which there are potential breaches in international law, as a result of the crackdown on political assembly, speech, and the other things you kind of outlined. So, in addition to asking the UN rapporteur to comment on these things, are there any other avenues that you're exploring in terms of kind of implementation of breaches of international law? So obviously, you mentioned that the ICJ isn't an avenue in this case, because of your individuals, but are there other kind of international legal institutions that you're looking at?
I think it's important to recognise that that the ability to litigate this internationally is limited. But CAST is committed to a series of actions at the United Nations, including with the UN Human Rights Committee, as well as with other special rapporteurs to raise the issue. And further than that, the documents that we're preparing, which will be submitted to the United Nations, will also be submitted to the national states, foreign officers and governments for them to take consideration of as well. Because the important thing here is that governments recognise what's happening in Pakistan and put pressure to neutralise wherever nefarious pressure is being put on Pakistan to allow free and fair elections in Pakistan. And it's really important at a time like this, where we've seen just in recent days, I think perhaps quite surprisingly, Iran and Pakistan having a violent military spat with each other, or Iran targeted some militants in Pakistan. Pakistan used its weaponry to retaliate and fire at Iran. And I think when you have a state that is taking action like that as part of a wider conflict, so it was clearly part of a wider conflict stemming from Israel and Palestine, you need to be sure that the people in that state are supportive of his government's actions. And the only way that you can have that clarity is by allowing free and fair elections. And if the people of a country, of a state, choose not to engage in military action, then the only way you can really understand that is by through elections where a mandate is voted for. So I think the important thing here is not so much about actual litigation; it's about raising the issue and getting further answers out of Pakistan, because it's also been extraordinarily difficult to get evidence from Pakistan itself because of the serious suppression of individuals. And so if we communicate with somebody in Pakistan, there's a real risk to that person for their safety. And so I think this is a slow process over a period of time.
I would just add to what Tayyab has said. The only solution is free and fair elections. That's what Imran Khan has been asking again and again, every day in its court appearance, free and fair elections. Because all these polls have shown that he would probably win by 80% majority, much more than 2/3 even, because when these reporters go on the roads, they interview young boys, young girls, old people. They overwhelmingly say they are going to vote for PTI. And that is the reason they have taken the symbol away. They are trying to destroy the party because they don't want a leader there which will have a majority, which will be able to change things, which will be able to put restrictions on the most powerful and the most corrupt over there. It's a mafia. And they managed to get no confidence vote, and now they managed to put him in prison. So people need to know this. People of the world need to know this. And the movement has to build up slowly and slowly. Come out.
The final, very probably more technical answer to your question, rather than the kind of more interesting one, is just to clarify that the scope of this petition to the UN Special Rapporteur is just limited to, she only investigates the right to freedom of expression. So it's specifically targeted to that issue in particular. And other special rapporteurs obviously have different mandates. And that's Tayyab referred to the fact that that's kind of the next step that we're looking at, is what other UN special rapporteurs can we go to. The wider possibility as well is that there's an upcoming periodic review at the United Nations which looks at Pakistan's kind of compliance with human rights as a whole, and that's obviously somewhere where you get to raise multiple different issues all at once. So that's another forum. Again, all of this is through the lens of human rights complaints. What can we establish as a matter of law human rights that are being breached on the ground in Pakistan? And some allegations that's easy to do from the outside because we can see it. I mentioned the fact that with internet shutdowns, the only good thing from an accountability perspective is that that's something that we can specifically trace and put to the UN Special Rapporteur in kind of unambiguous terms. Other issues do require free contact with people who are in Pakistan in a way that it's not absolutely clear we can always do. So that's the necessary limit on the legal framework, is that we have to have a sufficient factual basis to put things forward, even at the UN and international level.
Thanks very much. I think that brings our session to a close, and thank you very much all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
जी अजीज आनमन, ये बाइंड्समैन LLP जो है इसका मैं सिर्फ यही आपसे रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि देयर इज नो नीड टू, आप गूगल रिव्यूज पे किसी लॉ फर्म को जज नहीं कर सकते। यहाँ पे बैरिस्टर तैयब अली मौजूद थे और बैरिस्टर पोला रोस्टिक मौजूद थी। मैं आपको सिर्फ इतना बताऊं कि ये जो आपने देखा है ये टीम, जो लीगल टीम है, ये वो लीगल टीम है जिसने फलस्तीन का केस लड़ा, और फलस्तीन का केस जो है वो यूके के हाउस ऑफ लॉर्ड्स में और इंटरनेशनल कोर्ट्स में इन्होंने, इन लोगों ने ना सिर्फ लड़ा बल्कि इन्होंने जो है वो वारंट निकलवाए हैं इजरायली जर्नलों के कि वो ट्रेवल करके यूके में नहीं आ सकते। तो ये इतना मजाक नहीं होता। हाँ, ये बहुत बड़ा टाइम कंज्यूमिंग प्रोसेस होता है। जो उन्होंने बातचीत की, जो लोग कह रहे थे कि जी तर्जुमा करके बताना है आपने, तो बेसिकली जो बातचीत यहाँ पे हुई है, उन्होंने बताया जी हमने एक सीरीज ऑफ लीगल एक्शंस जो है वो हमने की है। हम पाकिस्तान विजिट भी करना चाह रहे हैं और वहां हम डेलीगेशन लेके जाना चाहते हैं ह्यूमन राइट्स का, और जारी बात है वो पाकिस्तान की जो है वो हुकूमत की इजाजत से वो काम हो सकता है, लेकिन अगर वो नहीं करेंगे तो फिर बैनुल अक़वामी सतह के ऊपर भी एक्शन किए जाएंगे। ये जो बात है इन्होंने जो की है, डॉक्टर उस्मान खान भी इसके अंदर बात कर रहे थे। इमरान खान के कजन है, सिटीजन अगेंस्ट स्टेट टॉर्चर के डायरेक्टर हैं, बड़े ही जबरदस्त किस्म का जो है उनका एक एफर्ट है। वो खुद भी पाकिस्तान नहीं जा सकते। डिटेल सेशन मैंने जो है वो एक दिन पहले उनके साथ किया है, वो भी आप देख सकते हैं, तमाम प्लेटफॉर्म्स के ऊपर अवेलेबल है। उन्होंने जो बातचीत की उसमें उन्होंने जो है वो पाकिस्तान में जो फौज का तसल्लुत है, गैर कानूनी तसल्लुत है, और जो फस्तायत है जर्नैलों की, उसके ऊपर उन्होंने बात की जी। उसके अलावा उन्होंने जो है वो बात ये की कि लीगल प्रोसीजर्स क्या है और इंटरनेशनल लॉज बताए जिसके तहत ये उन्होंने केस बताया, और उन्होंने सबूत बताए कि वो कौन से सबूत हैं जो साबित करते हैं कि पाकिस्तान में जो कुछ इस वक्त हो रहा है वो बैनुल अक़वामी कवानीन के तहत गैर कानूनी है, इंसानी हकूक की खिलाफ वर्जी है, और ये कंफर्म केस इनके खिलाफ बनता है जिसमें मीडिया के ऊपर कब्जा जो है वो भी शामिल है, रिस्ट्रिक्टेड मीडिया फ्रीडम शामिल है। एविडेंस वो कहते हैं जी बहुत इंतहाई वाजे है। तीन चीजें मेन जो उन्होंने कहा जिसके ऊपर इनके खिलाफ केस बनता है, टाइम कंज्यूमिंग प्रोसेस जरूर है, उसकी वजह उन्होंने जो बताई वो भी आगे आपको मैं जाके बताता हूं। सबसे पहले पाकिस्तान की अवाम के ऊपर गैर कानूनी जो है वो क्रैक डाउन किया गया है पाकिस्तान की स्टेट की तरफ से, वाज़े एविडेंस है। पीटीआई के ऊपर जो है वो क्रैक डाउन किया गया है, ये वाजे है, इमरान खान उसमें शामिल है, पॉलिटिकल स्पीच अलाउ नहीं की जा रही, मीडिया फ्रीडम नहीं है। और तीसरी चीज उन्होंने मेन जिसके ऊपर एविडेंस वाजे है, जिसके ऊपर आगे चल के आज नहीं तो कल लाजमी जो है इसका उन्होंने फैसला करना है, वो है जनाब इंटरनेट के ऊपर पाबंदी। ये बुनियादी इंसानी हकूक के अंदर ये चीज अब आती है। ये तीन डिस्टिंक्ट टाइप ऑफ क्रैकडाउन है जो कंफर्म है, और 9 मई के फॉल्स फ्लैग ऑपरेशन की उन्होंने बात की कि वो हुकूमत पाकिस्तान की वाज़े तौर के ऊपर जिम्मेदारी थी और उन्होंने उसको पॉलिटिकल एडवांटेज के लिए इस्तेमाल किया, क्रैकडाउन के लिए इस्तेमाल किया। पाकिस्तान की कोर्ट्स के ऊपर उन्होंने सवाल उठाया कि पाकिस्तान की जो अदलिया है वो पाकिस्तान की अवाम के खिलाफ होने वाले फस्तायत को में सहूलतकारी फराम कर रही है। ये बात इन्होंने इंतहाई वाज़े तौर के ऊपर बात की। अपने अब तक पिछले 12 महीने के एक्शंस में उन्होंने यूनाइटेड नेशन स्पेशल रेपिट्योर के साथ जो केस टेकअप किए हैं उसके नतीजे में आयरीन खान जो स्पेशल रेपिट्योर हैं, स्पेशल इन्वेस्टिगेटर हैं अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा की, वो 7 दफा जो है वो 7 दफा गवर्नमेंट ऑफ पाकिस्तान को जो है वो लिख चुकी हैं और उनकी जो है चार्जशीट उनको भिजवा चुकी हैं। प्राइमरी फोकस इन्होंने मीडिया और पाकिस्तान की फ्रीडम और इंसानी हकूक के ऊपर लिखा है। इस बात का वो अदारक रखते हैं और ये बात उन्होंने एक्नॉलेज की है कि अमेरिका जो है वो इस तमाम चेंज की तरफ से जो इनके पीछे है, जो पाकिस्तान में काम हो रहा है, लगता यही है कि अमेरिका इस चीज के अंदर है और पाकिस्तान के जर्नैल जो बदमाशी कर रहे हैं उसका फायदा हो रहा है मगरबी ममालिक की हुकूमतों को, उनके इंटरेस्ट के अंदर है। एग्जैक्ट उनके वर्ड थे कि जो कुछ पाकिस्तान के अंदर इस वक्त हो रहा है इट इज वर्किंग इन वेस्टर्न गवर्नमेंट्स फेवर। جو UK USA تمام, اور یہ پھر پولیٹیکل سپریشن اس لیے زیادہ سے زیادہ کی جا رہی ہے. اس بات کو انہوں نے جو ہے اس کے اوپر بھی انہوں نے زور دیا. انٹرنیٹ کے بارے میں انہوں نے کہا کہ ہال مارک ہے ڈکٹیٹرشپ کا, جو بھی ڈکٹیٹرشپ ہوتی ہے وہ یہ کام کرتی ہے. یونائٹڈ نیشن کے علاوہ ہم نے ان سے پوچھا کہ انٹرنیشنل کورٹ آف جسٹس میں نہیں جاتے, تو انہوں نے کہا جی کہ انٹرنیشنل کورٹ آف جسٹس میں اسٹیٹس جا سکتی ہیں, این جی اوز نہیں جا سکتی. سٹیزن اگینسٹ اسٹیٹ ٹارچر ایک این جی او ہے, اسٹیٹ ایز اے ہول جا سکتی ہے, آج نہیں تو کل انشاءاللہ ضرور جائے گی. آپ فکر نہ کریں, تمام کے تمام ہم حساب کتاب ان لوگوں کے ساتھ برابر کریں گے. حالات ایک سے بالکل نہیں رہتے, اور تمام کی تمام چیزیں جو انہوں نے ویل ڈاکومنٹڈ ایویڈنس کے ساتھ رکھی ہوئی ہیں, جس کے تحت جو ہے وہ آگے چل کے جس طرح بین الاقوامی جو آپ نے دیکھا ہے آسٹریلیا نے جس طرح بنگلہ دیش آرمی آفیسرز کے اوپر اسی طرح کے کام کرنے کی وجہ سے ان کے اوپر پابندی لگائی ہے, اور وہ بھی باقی گورنمنٹس کو بھی لگانی پڑے گی, تو پاکستانیوں کو بھی انہوں نے یہ استعمال کر کے پھینکنا ہی ہے, کیونکہ عوام پاکستان کی جاگ گئی ہے. اور پاکستان کی عوام جب جاگ گئی ہے تو یہ بدماشی زیادہ عرصے تو نہیں چل سکتی, یہ اپنی موت اب مرے گی. جو جرنیلوں کی بدماشی ہے یہ ختم ہونے کی طرف جا رہی ہے, واضح طور کے اوپر ختم ہونے جا رہی ہے, اور یہ بدماشی جو ہے اس نے ختم ہونا ہی ہونا ہے. تو الٹیمیٹلی یہ جو لیگل پروسیڈنگز ہیں یہ وہ کہتے ہیں کہ ٹائم کنزیومنگ چیزیں ہیں, کوئی فکس ٹائم لائن آپ کو نہیں دیتے, لیکن یہ ان کے گلے کا پھندا انشاءاللہ بنے گی, اور ہم ان کو جو ہے بین الاقوامی عدالتوں میں بھی گھسیٹیں گے. ان کی جائیدادیں جو ملک سے باہر ہیں, جو ان کے بچوں نے سنبھالی ہوئی ہیں, وہ بھی ضبط ہوں گی انشاءاللہ. آپ فکر نہ کریں, جب ابھی تو جرنیلوں سے کام کروا لیتے ہیں, جب پاکستان کے عوام کے نمائندوں سے ان کو کام کروانا پڑے گا, اور وقت دور نہیں ہے. اب یہ شعور کا جو سلسلہ پاکستان میں جو شروع ہو چکا ہے, آپ جو مرضی کر لیں, جو آگے نسلیں آنے والی ہیں وہ آپ کی بدماشی نہیں مانیں گی, نہیں مانتی کسی بھی صورت. جو آپ نے ان کو ٹیکسٹ بک میں سبق پڑھایا ہے وہ غلط سبق پڑھایا ہے. اب وہ خود اپنے ہاتھوں سے دیکھ رہے ہیں, تاریخ بنا بھی رہے ہیں اور تاریخ لکھ بھی رہے ہیں, اور پیچھے 76 سال کے جھوٹ جو ہیں وہ سارے اکھاڑ پچاڑ کے آپ کو جو ہے ان کی بتی بنا کے آپ کو دے دی گئی ہے واپس. اور اب جو ہے انشاءاللہ یہ جو سلسلہ چلا ہے, اللہ کے گھر میں دیر ہے اندھیر نہیں ہے. آپ نا امیدی نہ رکھیں. جو پہلا سٹیپ ہے وہ 8 فروری کو جو ہے وہ آپ کا پہلا سٹیپ ہے قرارداد حقیقی پاکستان کے لیے, قرارداد حقیقی آزادی کے لیے. قرارداد حقیقی آزادی پیش ہونے جا رہی ہے 8 فروری کو. آپ نکل کے اپنا ووٹ کرتے ہیں اس قرارداد کے حق میں, اور اپنے ووٹ کی حفاظت کرتے ہیں, تو آزادی بھی انشاءاللہ ملے گی. آپ فکر نہ کریں, تاریخ پاکستان کی پڑھیں. قرارداد پاکستان 1940 میں جو ہے وہ اپروو ہو کے 1947 میں پاکستان 7 سال میں بنا تھا, لیکن اس وقت کیونکہ دنیا بڑی تیز ہو گئی ہے, آپ لوگ بہت بے صبرے ہو گئے, اور آپ لوگوں کی جو ہے تعداد بھی بے تحاشا ہو گئی ہے, تو انشاءاللہ 7 سال نہ صحیح لیکن میں کہتا ہوں کہ 76 سال کا قبضہ جو ہے اس کو چھڑوانے میں 76 مہینے تو لگ ہی جاتے ہیں نا, جن میں سے 25 مہینے گزر چکے ہیں. اس لیے پیوستہ شجر سے امید بہار رکھ, ملت کے ساتھ رابطہ استوار رکھ, اس لیے گھبرانے کی ضرورت نہیں ہے. خان کہتا ہے, ہم سب کہتے ہیں, خان کا کزن بھی یہاں پہ بیٹھا تھا, آپ نے گھبرانا نہیں ہے. میں الیکشن کی کوریج لائیو سٹریم جو ہے وہ سر حیدر مہدی کے جو ہے یوٹیوب چینل کے اوپر کروں گا. آج بھی جہاں آپ مجھے وہاں پہ ڈیلی آلموسٹ دیکھ رہے ہیں, آج بھی آپ مجھے دیکھیں گے وہاں پہ سر حیدر مہدی کے چینل کے اوپر. وہاں پہ ہم کوریج بھی کر رہے ہوں گے, اور جو ہے اس کے بعد میراتھن سیشنز بھی ہم نے کرنے ہیں 7 اور 8 تاریخ کو. تو اس لیے آپ فکر نہ کریں, انشاءاللہ اللہ پاک جو ہے وہ کرم کرے گا. اور باقی جو ہے وہ آپ نے بس صرف اور صرف جو ہے نا وہ ہمت نہیں ہارنی, اللہ پاک کرم کرے گا. ٹیک کیئر آف یور سیلف. آپ کے کمنٹس بڑے میں زبردست پڑھتا رہا ہوں. اب میں آپ کو لائیو دیکھ رہا ہوں ٹک ٹاک کے اوپر, اوڈیسی, رمبل, انسٹاگرام, ایکس, ٹویٹر, ٹویچ, اور یوٹیوب کے اوپر آزاد شاہین ٹی وی, لنکڈ ان اور فیس بک کے اوپر. آپ مجھے اجازت دیجئے, بہت بہت شکریہ آپ کا. تھینک یو سو ویری مچ. پاکستان زندہ باد. 8 فروری نشانہ سیدھا رکھنا ہے, ٹھیک ہے جی. ٹیک کیئر آف یور سیلف. وعلیکم السلام.